And there have been a ton of studies out there that show if women focus on what their purpose is, what their mission is for being there, they'll be able to get all that other stuff out of the way instead of thinking about, oh, my hair, or this dress is uncomfortable, or, all that other junk just goes away if we literally can get to the place where we're focusing on our purpose for being there.
Welcome to Business with Purpose. I am your host, Molly Stillman, and this show is all about bringing you the stories behind the brands, the companies, and the small businesses that are changing the world. Each week, I get to sit down and have a conversation with an incredible person, a community leader, activist, author, speaker, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and all of the above. And I get to hear how they are using their skills, their God-given gifts, not only in their personal lives, but also with their career. My goal with this show is to show you, the listener, that no matter where you are, no matter what you do for a living, you can make an impact. My guest this week is Jane Hanson. Jane grew up in rural Minnesota, coming to New York 3 decades ago to join NBC as an anchor and correspondent in New York. She co-anchored Today in New York and hosted Jane's New York. She's covered events ranging from the tragedy of 9/11 to the joy of the Yankees victory parades to Wall Street, Washington. She's interviewed presidents, business leaders, prisoners, celebrities. She's traveled as far as the Gobi Desert in Mongolia and the Great Depth Miles below New York City for her special reports. She has won 9 Emmys. No big deal. She was named Correspondent of the Year by New York's police detectives and firefighters. So many awards. She is also incredibly generous, has worked with incredible nonprofits and community organizations making an impact. And currently in her current life, she is a much sought after communications coach working with top tier leaders in every field while continuing to MC, speak, and host broadcasts. Such a fun conversation that I had with Jane, and such a small world. It happens that Jane actually worked with my cousin years ago. So I have a nice little family in common. We just had the best conversation. It was so rich and I just learned so much from her. And she's one of those people that I could honestly probably do an entire podcast series with, just listening to her tell stories, because she's been there on the front lines for so many, just memorable things that have happened in our country's history, in our world's history, so many things. She is just, what a gift she is, and you are going to absolutely love her. So without further ado, let me get into my conversation with Jane Hanson. Well, I am so excited to welcome my guest this week, and that is Jane Hanson. And she and I, before we were even recording, we're talking about what a small world it is, and how years ago you worked with my cousin and a former boss of mine. And so we have all these mutual kind of friends and family in common. And so now I already feel like I know you. And so I'm so excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. And I love that spiritual kind of connection thing, because it gives you you instantly either like someone better, or you feel like you've got a way of knowing them, knowing that they know people and they like people that you like and that you love, blah, blah, blah. It's all cool.
I know. Yeah. It's that instant connection. I love it. Well, Jane, I'm so just eager to learn more about you and just the incredible experience that you have. But before we do that, let's just have you do what all my guests do, and that's give us the Jane 101. So who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
All right. So this Jane is a communications coach, meaning I do media presentation, video coaching. I do a lot of speaking, emceeing across all kinds of media platforms and in front of any kind of audience anywhere that will let me come and talk to them. And I'm talking, it's all about communication. And where did I learn about all of this? By being a broadcaster for the NBC Networks in New York for almost 30 years. And I started that at a very young age, growing up in rural Minnesota, town of 2,500 people, which is the most amazing thing, because we didn't have a stoplight. And then I moved to New York City, where there are stoplights. I don't even know how many tens of thousands of stoplights
I think I think stoplights have stoplights. So
yeah, exactly. So bottom line is, my life went from a little girl in a rural tiny town where just about everybody in the town was related to me, to a giant city that actually kind of took me in its arms and let me be a success. So it was really, truly wonderful. But my background is really all about broadcasting and communications. And to me, life is all about communicating, and you communicate every day in thousands of ways, and you don't even realize what you're saying or telling or doing. And so it's something I love to help people do better. That's what I do.
I love it. And I am so curious, what is it that took you from rural Minnesota to New York, where you went from no stoplights to stoplights on stoplights?
I would say a couple of things, one of which is my father was an incredible inspiration for me. And when I was a little girl, and I mean really little, like 4 or 5, 6 years old, he would read stories from the newspaper to me. And I got this quest then for wanting to see the world and this insatiable curiosity about asking questions and learning what I could and then sharing it. So I think that's where the kind of the quest to become a journalist came from. Then secondly, I just got damn lucky. And one of my favorite stories is I was working in one of my very first jobs in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is the 72nd market in terms of television rankings in the country. And I'd been lucky enough to have been asked to have gone to New York City for an interview at a television station, which, by the way, I failed miserably in that job. I was way too green. I was like 23 years old. And there's no way I was going to be hired to be the main anchor at a television station in the largest city in the country. So anyway, what happened is then about a month or two later, I get a phone call from this other gentleman who says, "Hello, I'm Ron Kershaw from WNBC TV in New York." And I went, "Yeah, sure, right." And I hung up. Because I was sure it was somebody pulling a prank, because I told all of my TV friends, everybody I knew, I'm moving to New York. And they're like, sure you are. So this guy calls back again and he says the same thing. And I hung up again. So one more time he calls, I write this number down. I write the number down and then and hung up. And then I call the number back because I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to find out who's the jokester here. And I hear, "Good afternoon, WNBC TV, Ron Kershaw's office." And I nearly fainted because it was a real person and it was really who he said he was.
Oh my gosh. And
so I tell his assistant who I am, and she starts to laugh and she goes, "We were wondering if you were going to call back." Net, I got hired by this guy. And that began the story of an amazing career in New York and at NBC. And I think the lesson learned is probably I caught his attention because I was not taking something seriously, but also just being kind of persistent about, I don't buy into this. So, and I think he thought that meant something in terms of my capabilities or who I really was. So, anyway, but a joke, what I thought was a joke turned into be an amazing, really pushing me forward to a great career.
Okay, I love that story because I think so many of us can relate to some moment in our lives where we have like put our foot in our mouth or like just done something where we go, why did I do that?
Exactly. And just like, it's just crazy. So anyway, that's what happened. I put my foot in my mouth and it actually just push my butt forward.
Well, and that's kind of what I was thinking is like, so often sometimes that those situations happen where we do something and we go, like, why did I do that? But for you, it turned into this just incredible opportunity. And I love thinking about the assistant and him just in his office being like, "She'll call back. Don't worry. She's gonna realize."
Yeah. It's like, it was, and they were all laughing. And so anyway, and he wasn't used to being treated like that. Usually people are, falling.
Oh yeah.
Over heels.
And I think sometimes with people in positions like that, when somebody like you comes across and doesn't, fawn over them or it's almost like they have this additional level of respect of like, okay, well now I have to earn her. I gotta work for this a little bit more.
Exactly. Because I'm sure he thought, oh, goody. When do I get to show up?
Well, okay. So you started at NBC and you had this incredible, career that spanned, 30 years. won multiple Emmys. You've traveled the world. I'm so curious, like when you have a career like that on paper looks just a dream, is a dream, that there's so many people that would be like, gosh, what an amazing career. I'm curious. I have kind of two parts of this question. The first question I want to ask is, what part of it really challenged you the most, was really maybe unexpected or difficult, or really stretched you in a way that, you know, looking back, you're like, man, I'm really glad that I went through that in order to gain X, Y, and Z?
Well, there's a bunch of different things that come to mind. One of the things is that for 18 years of that career, I did an early morning newscast that started first at 6:30, then it went to 6 a.m., and then it went to 5:30, and then it went to 5 a.m. So I got up at 3:20 in the morning.
Woo!
18 years, not 3:19, not 3:21, but 3:20. I still have sleeping issues today. And many mornings I wake up at 3:20. And I don't stay up, thankfully. So my life was out of kilt with the rest of the world. And that was hard because I went to bed at 8 or 8:30 at night, and I took a nap every day. But I'll tell you but there was a silver lining in that when my daughter was born, I never had to put up with that getting her ready for school in the morning, which was a nightmare for most people. But for me, I got to avoid that. But I was able to pick her up most afternoons. And when she started school sports, I got to go to almost every game, etc. So, but that being out of kilt with the rest of the world, and I used to at night sometimes, you know, when I'd be off on a vacation or something, I go, wow, there's life after 8 p.m. So that adjusting the schedule, but you know, they're never in the television news industry, there's never a perfect schedule.
Yeah.
Bad news always happens. Something extraordinarily always happened on the Friday night before the Saturday I was about to take off on a trip. And I had many things that I had to make, you know, I had to give up in order to have that career.
Yeah.
The second thing was being a woman in it at a time when women were not necessarily treated the same. I mean, there were many times I know I made less money than my male counterparts. I know I had to fight for a long time. I had to fight to be able to do sports stories. So there were those kinds of challenges. And then the third thing is you always have to be on, because you never know when there's going to be a moment. Like you can't afford to be a crab apple. You can't afford to be mean to people, because they'll then spread the word that, you know, that TV news anchor you like so much in real life, she's a you know what.
Yep.
So you're constantly on guard, and you're a bit of a minor celebrity kind of pulls into that as well. People recognize you and they'll say things to you. You have to develop a hard skin. Like, I hated that story you did, or why were you so mean to that person you interviewed? Or there can be a lot of criticism and negativity. And you have to develop this kind of exterior that says, wow, I just have to accept that. And if this is the job I want, this is what it's going to entail. So on, you know, the wondrous side of watching history being made before my very eyes and interviewing some of the most magnificent people in the world and some of the worst people in the world, and all of that experience, there's this other side of it that can be challenging. I mean, the hours are long. The things that you see can be horrific, but at the same time, it's just amazing. So it's the good and the bad and the ugly in there.
Yeah, man, and I was thinking as you were talking about how your career spanned such a wide range too of technology, and how, you know, when you started your career, there were not cell phones or the internet. I mean, I think about that, you know, just with growing up, and I, you know, try to explain to my kids all the time, like what life was like before the internet. And they're like, what'd you do? I was like, I don't know, read books, played outside, drank from a water hose attached to my house. You have to like let the warm water come out first, then you get the cold water, you know, all that. But you know, and my kids are like looking at me like I'm you know, insane, you know. But thinking about too, like specifically in an industry like journalism and broadcast media, how how your job, what you did and what it looked like changed so drastically, but also the impact that it had on you, kind of like you said, being on guard because, early on, yeah, you were just on TV, but then as it shifted, then you had the internet and you had social media and all those kinds of things. And it really shifts. I'm curious, like for you, did you feel that? Did you feel that change over the decades from no internet and social media to internet and social media and also having to be on TV and all those kinds of things?
Absolutely. Because part of it made our lives easier with the technology because there was such instant communication.
Right.
I mean, we communicated by two-way radios and satellite phones and things like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, we still had probably the highest technology that existed in its current form.
Yeah.
As we went along. But, I'll never forget the very first live remote I ever did, where we actually could be doing something live from a different location and did an entire newscast from there. And everybody's got their fingers crossed that it's going to work because we're bouncing signals, especially in New York. When those live trucks you would see, you would bounce signals off of buildings so it could reach the satellite, so it could get back to our main hub at Rockefeller Center. And you were just, hoping that something didn't get in the way of it. To today where, you and I are talking like this because we turned our computers on and hooked up to the internet. So technology, I reveled in watching its development and what we could do with it. And I always wanted to be at the very front of that because I felt like it just made our ability to deliver our messages to people easier. And so that was great. But when it fails, and it does, that would be a nightmare because we had many moments in time when we had to backstrap things. I remember doing things like being overseas where we would have cables stretched and all kinds of wires and different adapters and all kinds of things stretched all over rooms, just trying to be able to get a signal. My favorite technology story, however, is the following. I was in Greece covering the Olympics in 2004. And before the Olympics started, we got there early to do some kind of fun stories ahead of time. So we went to a little island that I can't remember the name of it now. And we were going to broadcast live from the top of an abbey, which is at the top of the highest point on the island, which was kind of a little mountain.
Yeah.
But to get our gear to do this live remote, we had to put our satellite technology, our satellite equipment on the back of donkeys. The donkeys carry it up there because the cars could not go up this.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I wish to God I had those pictures today. I don't know. I can't find them. But it was so hilarious because, just picture this. And then when we got to the Abbey, there was a monk dressed in his brown cassock with a great big skeleton key that opens up the door that leads up these very narrow, probably 2,000-year-old steps that are taking us up to the top so we can do our broadcast.
I love that so much. I had the mental, I don't need pictures because I have one in my mind's eye and it is better than anything I could ever see.
I know. It was just, so that to me is the epitome of where we were. And then you fast forward to things like, well, that was in 2004, but like during one of the Iraqi wars, we even had cameramen who could carry this miniature satellite equipment on their backs so they could broadcast from anywhere.
Yeah.
Just think about that.
Yeah. It's incredible. And it's so funny. A couple of weeks ago, a local news station came over to my farm and did a little human interest story on me. And it was really interesting. And it's funny because I didn't tell anybody about this. It was just one of those things. I was like, this is kind of awkward. But the reporter was so nice. And it was so fascinating to me because she did the entire video and audio all recorded on her iPhone. Yep. And I said to her, I just said, that is unbelievable to me. And she said, the reality is that's where stuff is moving. And she said, because the camera quality, the audio quality with a lav mic, she's like, it's as good, if not better, than some of those massive cameras that we used to carry around 5-10 years ago. And so now they just equip all the reporters with iPhones. And I just thought like that is mind blowing.
Well, it is, but we have a computer in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? So when I first started at NBC, when I would go out to do a story, we would have the cameraman lugging, or woman lugging, that giant camera.
Huge.
We would have a sound person who would carry that equipment that would be plugged into, and of course they had to run together if they were running to the scene of something. We would have a lighting person who would carry portable lights. There would be a producer, and then there would be someone else, because we were shooting on videotape, and we would take that, and then that video would then be rushed back to the studio so that it could be edited. And so I would have a crew of 5 people with me. You had a reporter with an iPhone.
Yep. And she was alone. And she's like, I can pretty much do everything from here. Just unbelievable. So I just thought, what the broadcast journalists are like, what would Walter Cronkite say? You know what I mean? Like just think of like the broadcast journalists of 40, 50, 60 years ago. Like
they would probably be thrilled.
Yeah.
Because they would have the ability to capture a moment.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes used to be jealous of some of the print reporters, I'm calling them, because, the newspaper reporters who would carry a notebook with them, and they could go in so many places and be able to write their notes and do that kind of thing. Whereas I had to have that camera with me.
Yeah.
And I always the camera had to be in place. And sometimes the videographer would say, "Oh, Jane, I wasn't rolling yet."
You missed it.
Yeah. So I think we have an ability now to capture a lot of things. My concern about it is that we get like a television news station, for example, can get videos in from all kinds of people coming in from a scene of anything.
Yeah.
But you don't know the perspective of it.
Right.
So you don't know what part is true.
Mm-hmm.
And pictures don't really lie, but you don't know from the angle of it. You don't know. Think about a television replay of a football game. They've got 5 or 6 different angles when they're looking at it. And so they can tell you then, oh yeah, we can see from this one picture that the guy's knee touched the ground first, right? Or something. But when you've got these videos coming in from a number of different people who are not trained journalists, and you're looking at it, you're not really sure what the truth is. So you can show it, but you have to be able to say, we've got this from somebody, from this source. This is what they showed us. We don't know the angle. We don't know the perspective.
Yeah. That's such an interesting point. And I love the way that you compared it to a football game replay. We're big football fans in our house. And you're right. And it's like sometimes you'll be watching a replay of something and you'll be like, but he was in. And then you see another camera angle and you go, oh, he wasn't. And yeah, this leads into almost a whole nother conversation for another podcast episode. So I won't go down this rabbit trail, but I'll just briefly touch on it. It opens the door when you have, anybody sending in photos, videos, you don't know what's manipulated. You don't know what is selectively cropped. You don't know, how something is shot. And then also the reality is we live in a world where a lot of media companies, for the most part, they have their own bias and perspective. And so they're going to also take that footage and they could, you could have a super conservative media outlet over here, show the same video as a super liberal media outlet over here, but the perspective is totally different. And the way they address it or spin it, and so anyway, you're right. It's a slippery slope. So it's like both this blessing and a curse all in one. And, but yeah, what an interesting, just kind of fascinating growth and development over the years, because you're right, it's totally different.
Yeah, we have used the term citizen journalists for that kind of footage, but you have to be careful.
Yeah,
you have to be responsible, and that there is such a heavy responsibility that comes with being a journalist.
Yeah,
and people are they're very critical, and I keenly felt it when I was doing stories, especially stories that I might have a feeling about. I'll tell you when it got really hard was after my daughter was born and I became a mother. And that's when I started to, when I do some of these stories, I would feel like, oh, that story makes me so, I'm so angry, but I couldn't allow that anger to show. I only had to tell the facts.
Yeah.
And then let the people that were watching decide for themselves, because that's our job.
Yeah. No, you're right. Ooh, I could go down a rabbit hole, but I won't. Well, the second part of that question that I wanted to ask, when I was asking about what was hard challenges, and that kind of led us into just the change in media. This is more just a selfless or a selfish curiosity question, is of all of the stories that you covered over, of a few decades, and some of the, I mean, you were there on the scene for so many things. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like to cover 9/11 and things like that for you. But are there any stories in particular that like really stand out for one reason or another that just you will just never leave you? And I realize that there's probably a lot, but are there any that are kind of top of mind?
Do you have a couple hours?
I know. Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned 9/11. Just briefly, I was the first reporter at NBC on the air. And it was simply because I was selfishly sitting in the studio waiting to go to a fashion show, because it was Fashion Week in New York City.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite designers was having her show at 9:00, and I was ready to do an update at 8:50 or 8:55. And so I'm in the studio, and somebody, a producer, says to me in my ear, "We think it's a plane that just hit one of the World Trade Center buildings. Start talking." And of course, I had no information. And, but I just, we showed the picture that we had from our camera on the Empire State Building, and we're looking down at the World Trade Center. And, they were instantly trying to find eyewitnesses. And so they got a janitor who lives on West 12th Street in Manhattan, and his name was Anthony. And Anthony says to me on the phone, he says, "Yeah, I saw that plane." We thought it was just a plane. At first, we thought it was a small plane that had gotten off course or something. And he said, "I saw that plane. It was big. It was silver and blue. And it was, I swear, it revved up its engine as it ran into that building. And you got to pray because everybody's dead." Those are the first words that come out of this guy's mouth. It's like, at that point, 8:48 in the morning. And the thing happened at 8:46 or something like that. And I'm going, we can't speculate on any of this, because everything this guy's just said, I'm like, the death part,
Yeah.
And so I said, and I have nowhere to go. I have nobody else to talk to. I have no information. I have this one picture. So I say, "Anthony, let's just review exactly what you saw." And so he went back over he talked about the size of the plane, which immediately dismissed our thoughts that it was a small plane, etc. He talked about watching it hit and what it looked like. And so, now we knew that it had to be some kind of a commercial aircraft. And then that revving up the engine part, I said, "Well, how did you, explain that to me?" And so he did that. And then he went back to we have to pray for these people, because how could they survive? And I mean, it turned out that he was absolutely right about everything he said. So that was a tough day. And I was on the air for almost 8 hours straight.
Yeah.
And so that was, obviously I'll never forget that day.
Wow.
Another super poignant moment for me was Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. He was in New York to speak at the UN, and I went down to a park in Lower Manhattan to interview him. And, as a reporter, we're always busy and always wanting to move on to the next thing. And when we think we're kind of done. So he stopped the interview in the middle of it. His handler stopped the interview. I'm like, "Oh, come on, I'm almost done here." And they go, No, you want us to do this. So they pulled him aside to tell him that he had just won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
And so he comes and sits back down, and, there are tears in his eyes, and at which point I almost started to cry. And then he talked about the impact of that and what it meant for his people and the work that he'd done. And of course, he was a very humble man and did not talked about, it was the work of many people to get to this point in their life in South Africa. So that was pretty cool. I also went to Mongolia with the American Museum of Natural History which is located in New York, because I had a show of my own for a while. And if you've never been to Mongolia, it's quite a place.
Yeah.
And we went into the middle of the Gobi Desert, where there is nothing for 700 miles except us and the museum and its rock star paleontologists who were looking for dinosaurs.
Wow.
And so we found some, but the most fun part is that when they go on these digs, you have to bring everything in. They brought generators and freezers full of food, and they brought some fine wine with them, and they brought their guitars. And so at night we'd sit in the middle of the desert where you can hear a pin drop for miles. They'd play their guitars and we'd have a little glass of wine, and it was just like surreal.
That's amazing. What an incredible memory. And wow, I could just sit here and do an entire, we could probably do an entire podcast just listening to your stories. Especially, I just in particular, not in a morbid way, but just always really, I like to hear stories of where people were on 9/11 and their different perspectives. And I grew up right outside of DC. So, the Pentagon was very close to home. A lot of my friends, because I was in high school at the time, and a lot of my friends were, their parents worked in the Pentagon. So, I just always am really fascinated by those stories. And I think it's important because it's something that I then try to teach my kids who, grew up in a post 9/11 era. And, in a lot of ways, that's 9/11 is to us as, the John F. Kennedy's assassination was to my parents, and all those kinds of things. And so I'm fascinated by those stories. I want to take a quick break from my conversation with Jane to thank our partner of the show, and that's Mama Suds. If you have been listening to the show for a while, you know how much I love Mama Suds. I love supporting small mama-owned businesses, and Mama Suds is no exception. They are a company that has incredible, effective, non-toxic household cleaning products. We have personally used everything from their laundry soap, their dish soap, their, stain stick, their shower steamers, Castile soap, you name it. We love it. We use it in our home. And I love that her products smell great. They are clean, safe ingredients, but most of all, I love that they work. There are so many times I feel like I will try, a safe or a non-toxic product and it just doesn't work. But oh my goodness, Mama Suds products work, and I want you to try them. So head on over to mamasuds.com and use the coupon code Molly, and that will get you 15% off your order. That's mamasuds.com. Use the coupon code Molly for 15% off your order. Now back to my conversation with Jane Hanson. Okay, I want to shift gears just a little bit because there was something you had said in the beginning. And I know that this is also something that you today and what you do in communications coaching and media coaching and video coaching, you work with a lot of women, and a lot of it comes from your experience as a woman in media and as a woman in broadcasting. And you talked about how, you worked during a time when it was just harder. And there's so many things about that are just, oh man, I would love to unpack. But I'm so curious, like just in your experience and, talking about how you coach women through this now. What are some of the things that you learned over the years that you really try to hone in on in helping women, whether it's on video, on stages and communication and interviews, all those kinds of things like that you kind of take from your experience, into today?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about women and communications, and by the way, some of the most prominent women in the world tell me that when they walk into a boardroom full of men, they feel like they're in kindergarten. And so what that says to me is we still have a perspective of ourselves that we need to change. And many times I almost feel like I'm a shrink in that part of me is trying to help instill self-confidence in them. A little story that just kind of illustrates this fact. When women speak in front of an audience, any kind of an audience, I'm talking about in person now, not virtually for the most part, but they'll see somebody out in the audience and they'll be doing a fine job. They'll see somebody out in the audience on their phone, looking at their phone, and immediately get rattled thinking, I'm not doing a good job. I'm not being interesting. They're not listening to me. And their brain just spins out of control. A guy, on the other hand, who sees somebody on the phone says one of two thoughts. A, man, this dude's missing the best speech of his life. Or, I bet I'm so good, he's tweeting everything out about me. So we need to be better advocates for our own abilities and to be kinder to ourselves. We wouldn't be in the jobs that we have. And when I'm training really high-level women, I need them to understand that they're the expert on whatever it is they're speaking about, or they're the boss, or they're the leader of a team, or whatever they are. They would not be the person doing the talking if they didn't know more about it than anybody else in the room. So therefore, you have to own your expertise and you have to focus on your purpose. And there have been a ton of studies out there that show if women focus on what their purpose is, what their mission is for being there, they'll be able to get all that other stuff out of the way instead of thinking about, oh, my hair, or this dress is uncomfortable, or, all that other junk just goes away if we literally can get to the place where we're focusing on our purpose for being there.
Yeah.
A second thing that we really need to do is to, Winston Churchill once said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So we really need to super prepare for what we do. And when somebody says, oh, I'm just going to wing it, I want to just wring their neck. Because so many things can go wrong anyway. Be prepared for what the message is that you want to deliver, and make sure that message is really super clear. And not, another thing about women we just think about, even when women want to apply for jobs, there'll be 15 criteria that are listed, and they'll have 14 of them, but they won't have that 15th, and they'll say, oh no, I can't do this. Whereas, again, different perspective. The male perspective is, so what? I've got this nailed. So it's, I think it's better now, but I think some of it stems from our childhood, when even sometimes as a girl in a classroom, we don't want to show how smart we are. We don't want to answer all the questions because we don't want to be the star. Many women say to me, well, I don't want to be boastful. I don't want to be a braggart. And so, so my response to that is there are ways to talk about it, and I'm going to teach them how, where you're not being a braggart, where you're simply talking about what you know, and the mission is to share that knowledge, share that expertise to help others. And so there's ways of doing that. And a lot of it is by telling stories, by the way. And if you can create that kind of aura about you, then you will communicate so much better. But it's, yep.
No,
I can see.
I love this so much. I love this so much because this is something that I have had to work through personally. And so I feel that deep within, like you're in a lot of ways speaking to somebody like me. And I hear from women all the time in different spaces that I'm in who struggle with the same thing. And I always try to tell them, I'm like, you're not alone. Like, you're not alone. You're not alone. Because I look back on things in my life where I ended up in a lot of male dominated areas for some reason. I don't know why, which, not a bad thing, but just was a reality, as a lot of times I was in male dominated spaces, or had was in a role where I was typically in a male dominated space. And before we were recording, one of the things that I told you about was how I get paid to talk to people now. And when I was growing up, I was always in class, getting told by teachers or administrators, I talk too much. I laugh too loudly. I'm too much. And I remember one of my first jobs out of college, I was working in, I think I've told this story on the podcast before. So if you're listening and you've heard it before, forgive me if you haven't, here you go. One of my first jobs right outside of college was I worked for Tim Kaine, who was at the time governor of Virginia. And I was a fellow in Tim Kaine's office, and I had been student body president at my university, and so I had applied for this fellowship, and so I got this fellowship. And there were women in the fellowship. It was definitely more men than women, but I ended up getting put in the governor's policy office, which was almost entirely male. There were definitely a few women, but everybody around me was male primarily. And my office was right outside of the governor's office. And my supervisor one day pulled me into his office and told me that I laughed too loudly and that my laugh was disturbing to some of the people that I worked with. And I mean, I still got my job done. I was one of the top, kind of fellows in the program. I mean, it didn't affect my work. I just would have conversations and I would laugh, and my loud genetic laugh landed me in trouble. And I remember I had walked out of the office and I was so defeated. I just felt so small and just like, I'm too much, and why am I here? And I don't deserve this, and all these kinds of things. And Governor Kaine had actually happened to walk down the hallway, and he passed me and he stopped me and he said, "Molly, are you okay?" And I said, and he said, tell me what's going on. And so he eventually kind of dragged it out of me. I didn't tell him who told me. I didn't want to like throw this guy under the bus. And he looked at me and he said, "You don't ever let anybody steal that joy that you have. That is a gift from God. Embrace it." And I said, well, thank you, Mr. Like I said, thank you, Governor. And then he said, "All right, now get back to work." And I said, "Okay, sir." Like I went back, but yeah, but women, I mean, nobody's was gonna ever say that to a man. That's a reality. A man's never gonna get pulled into his office and be like, "Your laugh is too loud." But I've carried that with me for years. And so here I am, at 37, and, just a couple weeks ago, I was talking with my husband and I was saying how, I've been really kind of struggling on kind of pitching myself for speaking engagements, because I've traveled and spoken at conferences and things like that for years. And I had all these ones lined up pre-COVID, and then COVID, canceled all those events, and I haven't been able to rebook anything. And anyway, and I was saying, and he's like, "Well, just ask, just pitch yourself." And I was like, but I can't do that. I can't do that because there's people that are better than, and he's like, "What?" You know what I mean? So I recognize what you're saying, because that is literally me.
So look, I'm terrible about asking people for favors.
Yeah.
But I mean, small favors. I don't mean big things. I'm not afraid to go ask for, but the thing is that you don't get it if you don't ask for it.
No, you're right.
And the lesson learned, by the way, about what Governor Kaine said to you is that while there may be people out there who think that something is irksome, what he said should be the part you carry with you.
Yeah.
And never the rest of it. Because, I mean, that's a blessing to have had him say that to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we take so much to heart, because there's a whole thing, and I can talk about this for hours. That we're people pleasers.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's a little thing that we sometimes do when we speak. We have an uptick at the end of our we'll say something like, "Hello, my name is Jane Hanson." And when I say it like that, it sounds like I don't even know my own name. and when we do this uptick, this up inflection, it turns a statement into a question. Mm. But women do it a lot. And you know why and we do it frequently, because we don't want to be like the smartest person in the world, in the room, because we want to please people. We like pleasing people. We're nurturers. It's inside of us. It's why we're so good at some things and sometimes so bad at other things, and pleasing people is a wonderful trait, but at the same time, we can't do it to our own detriment. And so I think that's one of the things that gets in our way, is we don't ever want to hurt somebody's feelings. We don't ever want to we don't want to put people down. We want to be gracious. We always try to share the credit when, frankly, sometimes nobody else deserves the credit. So, right?
I love you. Yes.
So it's, own what you have.
Yeah.
And don't be a jackass about it, but own what you have.
Yeah.
And be thrilled with what you've been given, and then use that to help others.
Yeah. And I love how you talked about purpose. And obviously, that's obviously a topic that's very close to my heart because I have a whole podcast about it. But how, purpose is behind everything that we do. And, in order to be successful, in order to be, really where, I believe that God has placed you is to focus on that purpose. And I remember I read something, I think it was on your website, where you talk about how purpose helps you to eliminate fear and it releases things that have held you back. And I couldn't agree more because it really is when you have that drive and not just it's focusing on something that is bigger than you. And I even love how you alluded to, when you have a skill or you have a knowledge that it's to use it to serve others and to bless others with that knowledge so that you can then equip other leaders, other communicators, other, insert X, Y, or Z, that it is not for you to just hoard this information or knowledge or skill or talent, but that you're to steward it.
That's absolutely right. And I will tell you what, I have never felt that work was work.
Yeah.
Any day of my life, because I always knew there was always this purpose or this mission to it. And and by the way, it was also fun.
Yeah.
But I think when you focus on purpose, it takes away, it doesn't mean that it's drudgery. It means that you're there doing something that makes you feel good, brings you some happiness. And it doesn't matter what the job is. It really doesn't. So I just, when somebody says to me, oh, I have to work tomorrow, or, oh, I get the day off, I'm so happy. I'm like, wow, I've never felt like that. So there's just, there's so much to think about this, but by the way, your purpose can change.
Yeah.
Over time. It's not like I have one purpose and this will be my purpose for the rest of my life. And your purpose, and your purpose can be a daily thing. Today, my purpose is to actually be able to write that story that I'm going to be able to get out there. I write for Forbes. I write columns for Forbes. And some days my purpose is simply to get that article out there so that it brings some inspiration or some laughs or something to somebody else. And then maybe the next day, my purpose is to make sure I'm preparing to do a big speech tomorrow, to make sure that I get it right, that I do a good job, that I help the people that are listening to it. And so, every single day there's kind of a different purpose. And some days my purpose is I just got to get organized because I'm a mess. Yeah. So, but if you focus on what it is that you're trying to do with your life, and I don't think people have time to sit down and think about that, and it's really like, do you sit every day? Do you do any kind of a journal, or do you do a gratitude thing?
I do. Yeah. I journal every morning. I kind of part of my morning routine is get up, I do my Bible reading, and then I've got my, my journal that I just kind of every day I write a little bit of what I'm thankful for, but then a lot of times it's just kind of me writing out my prayer for the day or something that I'm really just focused on at that time. And yeah, it has been a habit I've developed over the years that is key to who I am. And if you see the video, so right behind my head, those multicolored journals, those are all my journals over the last couple of years. And I'll look at them regularly. And it's fun to go and to see, well, here's what I was praying for a few years ago, or here's the thing that was really on my heart or on my mind a few years ago, or to see the answered prayers that I'm now sitting in, or just things that I was grateful for in the moment, whether it was something as simple as, a beautiful fall day or, fresh sheets. There's nothing better than crawling into a bed with fresh sheets. Or just a really delicious meal or laughter with friends or something like that. That's just those little things all the way up to the big things of like, I'm writing my first book, and I was able to look back and see the prayers that I had 2-3 years ago when I started working on my proposal and like praying about that and all of that. And to see like, oh, I'm now doing the thing that I prayed for all those years ago. And it totally shifts your perspective.
And I think it's really important to do. I don't think we spend enough time kind of delving into ourselves.
Yeah.
And when you do, it can change. I especially think it's important when maybe you feel like life is shifted a bit and it's not, something doesn't feel right. It feels off kilt. And that's when you really need to kind of focus on, well, what do I truly want? What do I desire? What am I looking for? And it all gets back to that word purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that on a regular basis, and I am, the more, I mean, I know you hear this. I know people say this all the time. The more you get into gratitude, the better your life will be. And it sounds really trite because we hear it so many places. It's on pillows all over the world, right? But it is true.
Yeah.
And the more you get into the gratitude about what you have the opportunity to do and see, the better it will be. And I keep going back to, my family and my little hometown is the foundation of my life. And, my parents are both long dead. And, but I feel the things they taught me every day.
Yeah.
And I think we need to just take, and now I have aunts and uncles and all of that have they're just consistently inspired me in ways they don't even know. And I'm going to bet that you inspire people in ways you don't know. I know that people have said things to me where and I get chills when I think about it, when they'll say, I remember when you did this for me. And I would have completely forgotten it.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know that at that moment in time, I was doing something that was going to help either, brighten that day for that person or give them some kind of something. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So it's really super important to feel what you've been given and to use it.
So good. So good. Jane, man, I could talk to you for hours. Well, before we get to the get to know you round, because we're running out of time, I just, how can people connect with you if they just want to support your work with you, just see more of, what you have to offer or hear your stories? Where can they best connect with you?
Well, you can reach me through my website, which is super simple. It's Jane Hanson with an ON.com. That's the best way. And it's got a connection on it. Or there's an email that you can use, which is jane@janehanson.com. I make it really super simple.
You do. You got to keep it simple. Well, I just am such a big fan of you. I adore you. And I knew right away that you and I would just connect. And this has been such a encouraging conversation and something that I think so many women and men too can connect with. And like I said, I hear from women all the time who want to get into some type of communication space. And I'm going to be like, you need to listen to this conversation because this is, like I said, I've even been in this space for nearly 20 years and I still struggle with this. So you know what I mean? It's just, it is a constant battle that we're fighting against. And
it is. And you just said, and men too, I don't want to leave men out because I mentioned my father was extremely important to me. And I have two brothers. I have had wonderful male mentors who have given me, they've promoted me in my career. They've given me wonderful sage advice, and they're just really super. So they too need communication help, and they too have wonderful things, to offer.
Absolutely.
And so I just want us to all get along.
I know, exactly.
The whole world. I want us to all get along.
Same. Yeah. And you echo my sentiments exactly. And like I said, my husband is just amazing. And he and I have talked ad nauseum about this, and he's been one of my biggest encouragers. And then like I told that story of Tim Kaine, who, such a great example of somebody who just, said the thing that needed to be said at the time and really encouraged me. And I have an amazing dad who has also been like my biggest fan, over the years. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's always one of those things where I just tell women, I'm like, we just need to be as confident as like walk around as confident as the men in our lives do.
That's exactly right. And we can do it because we've got it all.
Yeah.
I mean, we do. Think about it. Everything that we can do, we can be moms, we can be bosses, we can seek out these careers. We've got so much more freedom than the generations that went before us.
Yeah.
And that is just, it's amazing how much we've grown in the time of my career. The growth of women and what they have accomplished has been utterly remarkable.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for those who have come before me and those who have helped me along the way.
So good. All right, Jane. Well, before we go, this is the part of the show where we ask just some fun, lighthearted get to know you questions.
Uh-oh.
So, Jane, are you ready for the get to know you round?
Of course.
All right, cool. Question number 1, of all of your pet peeves, which one is the strangest?
Oh man, I don't even know how to answer that. I would say people who are late. I mean, I know it's strange because
no,
in
it's
today's
not strange.
I can't stand people who are late. It drives me absolutely nuts, way beyond normal.
I love it. I love it. That's a good one. Okay. What is something that has happened either this summer or in the past year that has had a really big impact on you or has been particularly memorable?
I would say the most memorable thing that I did this past year was taking a trip to South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And seeing the absolute beauty of that country. It's got a lot of issues, but the unbelievable beauty of that country and being on the other side of the world where the constellations are upside down and the people that I met, and then going on a safari to watch nature in its purest form and having lions walk within, inches of me.
Yeah.
And ignoring me. They didn't even want to eat me. Like, what? I'm not good enough? But anyway, so that to me was perhaps one of the most memorable things I've ever done in my life. It was really amazing.
Oh, I've never been to South Africa, but I've been to other parts of Africa, and it's just the most beautiful continent. And it is just the landscape and you're right, the nature, the animals it's incredible. There's nothing like it, truly nothing like it. Okay. Inevitably, in the movie that is going to be made about your life, who would you want to play you in that movie?
Well, I would probably like somebody like a Reese Witherspoon.
Ooh, yes. Do you watch Morning Show? Of
course.
I was going to say you have to. You have to.
And, there's some truth and there's some way over the edge things in there. I like it, but there's some things that I would do differently.
Yeah.
The reason I say Reese or somebody like her would be because I like sassy. I like, even though she's, really pretty and cute, she's not like, over the edge. And there's just I'm a hometown kind of girliness to her that is sort of kind of what I was and probably still am.
I love it. Oh, that's so great. Okay. And then the last question that I ask all my guests is, Jane, what does it mean to you to run a business with purpose?
It means my life's work. I have aha moments when somebody actually turns a corner and they become an amazing communicator and they understand the little tiny subtle things that they can do. They're going to make a huge difference in the way they are seen, perceived, accepted, how they resonate, and how it really helps them become more successful. That to me is it's mind-blowingly wonderful.
So good. So good. Jane, this has been an absolute honor and a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for just the gift that you are to this world.
Oh, thank you. Don't make me cry.
Thank you for being here.
And thank you. Had a wonderful, wonderful time with you.
Loved this conversation with Jane. She is just absolutely brilliant. And like I said, I told you I could listen to her stories all day long. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If there is something that you liked or something that you learned, would you share this episode or this show with somebody on social media? You can find me. I'm at Still Being Molly or at Business with Purpose Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. So you can tag us, and that is totally free and easy for you to do. And it really helps the show to grow, and it helps support the show. Also, would you take a moment? Would you go to your favorite podcast listening app, and would you click that subscribe or follow or whatever button it is there to make sure that you never miss a new episode of the show? And would you take a moment to leave a review? Leaving a review really does help me to know what you're liking and how the show is impacting you. This show is produced by the incredible team at Third Wheel Media. Now, I want you to go and do something good with purpose on purpose.